writing about this because she would have these like subjects in her head that she had been thinking about, and she would want a chapter on this said subject. Oh. That's so funny. So this chapter, one day I showed up and she said, "What about Catholic guilt? You got to write about guilt, right? We all have it. You got to write about it." So this is my chapter on Catholic guilt, and it's called Faith Because of Hope and Love. And what I won't read this section, but what I say in the introduction is that I can have faith because of hope and love, and when I'm not in a place of hope or of love, I'm in a place of either guilt or of fear. And so those, I feel, are the antithesis of each other. And the guilt that I'm speaking about, while we might have guilt that, oh, I don't go to church anymore, or guilt that I'm not Catholic enough, I think what that guilt really is saying in our head is, in some ways, I'm not enough. And that is the guilt that sometimes comes up in my head. So this is a section on guilt. It's not funny to say. We're always spending a Saturday night like this. Really careful with free drinks. Okay. One cause of this guilt is my itty-bitty shitty committee in the back of my head. These voices are critical and quite loud at times. In my early 30s, I realized that I needed to have a conference with them because of their demands. They were getting out of hand. A counselor suggested that I imagine the voices of the committee sitting next to me in a room and asked me to describe them in great detail. Within my head, you ready for this? I have an executive who wears black power suits, 2-inch heels, and has a bag to match every outfit. She is on time, she is thorough, and she is very decisive. I also have a camp counselor. She is in overalls and pigtails. She is sweet and nurturing and loves to do crafts, and she would much rather meditate than sit in a boardroom. Finally, I have a radical nun who speaks Spanish. I don't speak Spanish. In my head, I do. She works in an empowerment center for women and wears flowing skirts with cotton shirts from the donation center. The executive is outwardly annoyed that the camp counselor is so unpolished and is also unnerved by the social and political beliefs of the nun. The camp counselor puts the nun on a pedestal and thinks that the executive is blinded by her quest for efficiency and that she should drink less coffee. And the nun is often too busy with the work for others to notice what is going on internally. She prays for the others, but thinks that the two are both spiritually immature. These are the voices in my head as I try to make decisions about what to wear and who to be. Together, they each represent some actions and ideals to which I am attracted, but often they conflict. Nearly always, I am falling short of at least one of their expectations. These voices came at me in an especially loud way one afternoon as I drove to New York City for my roommate Chrissy's wedding. Getting out of the house had been a feat that day. I was getting the baby down for a nap, that was Jane, packing the 1,000 pieces of the breast pump and relaying information. I was relaying information about potty training and popsicles in the freezer to the friend who was babysitting. Katie, I think you were that friend. After all this, little Turner, who was 3 and usually quite excited to spend time with other people, especially Katie, was very sad that I was leaving. Prompted by my camp counselor, I pushed the whole trip back by 30 minutes and snuggled with him on the couch until he was ready for me to leave. In the eyes of the executive, I had to make up the 30 minutes, so I peeled out of the driveway in a flurry. It wasn't until New Haven, Connecticut, 2 hours later, that I realized I had forgotten my dress. Chrissy and Alex were having a sweetheart celebration on Valentine's Day in Central Park, and it was a black and white affair. This was not an occasion where my sweatpants and hoodie would do. In fact, Earlier in the week, I had carefully uncovered a dress that I had worn to my senior year high school homecoming. The nun wouldn't let me buy anything. I had borrowed fancy gloves and a pearl necklace from a friend, and I was delighted that it all fit. Choosing the outfit was a moment when all of the voices were pleased. When I realized that I left the dress behind, I let out an audible gasp, and then the committee began. The executive was irate and very expressive about how I was simply not cutting in. The camp counselor was trying to soothe the problem and jumping on the executive for being so harsh, and the nun was trying to remind me that the dress was superficial compared to the sacrament that I was going to witness. What was actually an understandable oversight because of my priorities with Turner became an audit of why I was not a fully functioning member of society, resourceful enough to deal with the problem, or that I was simply superficial. I spent at least 10 miles of the trip really caught up in the battle happening inside my head, while the feelings of not being enough were like the stomach acid seeping throughout my body. Nothing was changing, however. The dress was still back in Massachusetts, and I was on my way to New York. There was nothing that I could do to get the dress in the car. I was alone with only miles ahead of me, and this metaphor caught me. It quieted the voices in my head. I opted for stillness instead of the noise. The car is one of those places where I most meet the sacred. It is stuffed with car seats and filled with leftover snacks and overdue library books. But apparently, these are some of the things that usher in the spirit. The car provides space and time in which to silence the voices in my head, and a few from the outside, so that I can tune into what is true. This is God. It is consistent with the poetry that I read in the Bible. The same God who tears down the walls of Jericho also whispers to the psalmist. I elected this whisper to be the board chair in my head, and I imagine God patiently taking into account each of the others' opinions without their judgment. I am sure that God is not defensive, and as such can actually hear what is being said, and then reflect back to us what we need to hear. The consensus that we reached was to call my former roommates. They were already in the city, and to tell them that I needed them to find me a reasonably priced dress. Within 20 minutes, they were at Bloomingdale's and had an adorable black dress from the sales rack, one that I never would have bought for myself. It was a moment memorable because I did not appease anyone else to alleviate the feelings of guilt. Instead, I found a sacred space to listen to what was true. This is important because when we are absent to the truth, we are actually absent to everything. We miss huge moments in our lives and in the lives of others because we are so busy trying to reassure ourselves that we are okay. I didn't miss the ceremony that night. I was fully there and a witness to their love because I was able to accept that I too am loved, even in my unfinished state. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. This is just really a special moment in my life. I'll never forget it. Thank you for being here. Thank you. And selling books, I've learned, is all about relationships. So if you can help in any way, if you know somebody that you think this book will speak to, please pass it on in some way, whether liking me on Facebook, sharing my Twitter. My Twitter right now is pathetic, but I like the address. It's called @CatholicAsIam. I hope to continue this conversation with you. I'll be speaking in Natick in April and in other area places. If you have churches or faith sharing groups or book clubs where you think that this book would be relevant, please invite me. My contact information is up here. Most of you, of course, already know me, though.